Well, so we live inside a damaged structure, and we also bear responsibility for that damage because we don't do everything we can to constantly repair it. And you might say, well, that's actually one of the fundamental, people say, well, what's the meaning of life? What they really mean is, what's the positive meaning of life? Because as we've already discussed, the negative meanings of life are more or less self-evident. Well, the positive meaning of life is to be found in noting the state of lack of repair of the walled city that you inhabit, and then sallying forth to do something about that, to repair the breaches and to fix up the walls and to make the structure that you inhabit as secure and as productive as it possibly can be. And there's no shortage of opportunities to do that. You can do that in your own mind. You can do that in your own room. You can do that in your own household, in your local community. And maybe if you get good at doing it at all those levels, then you can start to look beyond that. And so there's challenges. That's the thing that's kind of interesting about this insufficient structure, is that it has a set of challenges built into it because of its insufficiency, and perhaps even because of its corrupt nature, that calls forth the potential response from you of heroic adventure. And the heroic adventure is to man the barricades and repair the city. And you can always do that. It doesn't matter what your personal circumstances are. There's always something that isn't right near you, isn't correct, isn't laid out properly, that you could just fix if you wanted to. And one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight is the idea that if you adopt an attitude that's like that the role that you should play is to make things better wherever you are, however you can, that what would actually happen would be that things would get better wherever you are in all sorts of ways, and that we've really, as a species, you might say, or maybe even as singular individuals, we've explored that rarely. It isn't something that's put forth as a proposition that often, and it's quite surprising to me. And I had an interesting experience the other day. I went to the Keg. I go there because I have food allergies, and they're very careful with people who have food allergies. And the waiter took me to the table, and he said that he had been watching my lectures, and that's a very common experience. And he was happy about that, and he said that he'd had 2 promotions at the Keg in the last 4 months because he'd been watching my lectures. And I really found that an affecting experience, because you might say, well, he's working as a waiter at the Keg and there's nothing particularly heroic about that. And I disagree with that, actually, because I don't care where you're located, you can do a hell of a job, and I mean that literally. At whatever job you have, you can take whatever job you have and you can make it a real nice little piece of absolute misery. Or you can act like a civilized human being and notice that no matter where you are, there's a richness and a complexity that's completely inexhaustible right at hand. And then you can take that seriously, and you can say, well, I happen to be a waiter at the Keg, and perhaps that's not what I expected, and he's a young guy, and perhaps that isn't where I want to end up, but it's not nothing. It's a rich environment, and I can make it a lot better if I want to. I can get along properly with my coworkers and not gossip behind their back, and I can treat my customers properly, and if an opportunity comes my way, I can take it, and I can see what happens. And so he said that's what he had started doing, and that things were working out much better for him. He was in a much better job than he was 3 months ago. And 3 months, that's nothing, right? I mean, that's a nice trajectory. It's an uphill trajectory. And that's what you want, really. An uphill trajectory is actually even better than being somewhere good, as far as I'm concerned, because one of the things that really makes your life meaningful is the clear realization that you're headed somewhere better than you are now. The responsibility element has been well received by people, and I think maybe that's because that message isn't being delivered as effectively as it should be. The idea that meaning is to be found in responsibility.
Yeah, you're saying it hasn't been developed. You're saying it hasn't been promoted as much.
Well, there's so much of an emphasis on rights. I mean, imagine if our culture was as dominated by discussion of responsibility as it was dominated by discussion of rights.
Gosh,
right? Completely. I mean, that's just not how it is at all.
Right.
And that's strange, because your rights, in some sense, are my responsibility, and vice versa. So, right, because your accorded rights, it's distance from other people in some sense. And for them, it's the same. And so you can't have one discussion without the other.
Mm-hmm.
But our discussion has been very one-sided. And I think that's hard on people because it's about what you're owed.
Yeah.
And it isn't obvious to me that, I don't know, it's not like not getting what you're owed isn't annoying. It is if you feel that an injustice has been committed. But it isn't obvious to me that people find the deepest meaning in their life in getting what they're owed. I really do think that people find more significance in their life in being of use, utility, and service to other people. That's how it looks to me. So, and often that's discussed in a sort of should way, you should be good to other people. It's like, well, your life is better if you do that. That's a different way of putting it. And you can get people to think about that. It's like, well, remember those times when people were particularly happy with something that you did, something for them. How did you feel about that? Well, you can figure that out for yourself. Maybe it didn't matter, but probably it mattered. Probably you'd like to have that happen a lot more. And then it's even better if you also understand that there's a direct causal relationship between the things that you're doing and the steepness of that incline. And so I get a lot of letters from people like that. And they're most frequently young men, although not always. And they say, well, I've been listening to these lectures and I decided that I'm going to try to take responsibility for my life. And so I've started to stop doing all the stupid things that I know that are stupid, that I know I shouldn't be doing. And I've started doing some of the things that aren't stupid that I know I should be doing, which seems pretty obvious, really, if you think about it. But obvious though it may be, that isn't necessarily what people do. And then they write and say, you can't believe what difference that makes. And they're thrilled about it. And so I'm thrilled about it when I get letters like that, because I really don't experience anything as better than a letter like that or a message like that, because it's so good to see things that aren't so good replaced by something better. And I really do think it's an open question. I truly believe it's an open question to what degree we could make things better if that's what we actually aimed at doing. I don't think that young people, especially in later days in junior high school, maybe even earlier than that, are taught enough to think about what they want and how they would go about getting it. And I mean what they want in a deep sense, like how their friendships could be better, how their relationships with their parents could be better, how their life could be better, practically speaking. So we tried to design a program to help younger people do the self-authoring program, but my health interfered with that and it fell by the wayside, unfortunately. But it's helpful for people to take stock of themselves and to chart a course. And I don't think our education system does a very good job of helping people develop a vision of themselves, a story for themselves. And it's a problem because it also means that they're not ennobled or encouraged the way they should be. And I've seen this all constantly during my lectures, that people are so happy to be encouraged. They're often met with skepticism instead. And I think that's part of the problem with what's happening in our culture politically too, is that, there's this terrible critique of our culture that all its institutions are fundamentally predicated on arbitrary power, the exercise of arbitrary power. And that implies that the ambitions of people who wish to join that culture and to thrive are expressions of tyrannical, oppressive, arbitrary power. It's very demoralizing to young people. Mm. And I don't believe it's true. Because I don't think the fundamental motivation is to exploit others. Mm. I think that people who do that fail, generally speaking, often precipitously. Societies that organize themselves around that principle are miserable and collapse. They're full of deceit and backstabbing and distrust. It's hell. And so I think that young people are best encouraged. And that means that you actually have to sort of like them. Like you're a mentor. It's like, I'm on the side of the good in you, and I hope it manifests itself. And I think that's what trust is for, by the way.
Mm.
You know, you should trust other people. Why? They can bite. Why would you trust them? Well, because it's courageous to. And that way you elicit the best from them. At least that's the best opportunity you have. You're going to get hurt sometime. You're going to get hurt distrusting too. But societies without trust are hell on earth. So